Hi everyone. I'm going to read A Bad Case of the Stripes to you. I'm sure you've heard the story before, but I use this story every year to do a writing with my fifth graders. It gives us the opportunity to listen to a picture book and see the awesome pictures. It gives us an opportunity to do a really creative writing and a really fun writing. So hopefully you'll enjoy this, and I've given you lots and lots of options for how to do the writing and be as creative as you want to be for this last writing assignment for week 7, your last week of virtual learning. Before I read the story to you, I want you to think about something ahead of time. I want you to think about how sometimes we don't always tell people how we feel. Sometimes we keep things hidden. And when we keep things hidden, it affects us. Either we become grumpy, we become sad, we become mad, we become angry. And this book is a perfect example of why not to keep things in us, to make sure that we are sharing our frustrations with people around us, that we tell mom and dad, grandma, grandpa, teachers, Miss Lou, Mrs. Houston, if we're feeling frustrated or upset, so that our bodies don't do very strange things like get stripes all over them, or if you read mine, get polka dots all over. So I want to read the story to you, but be thinking about that in the back of your head, because you're going to write a story that's based on this. Your story is going to be a bad case of the, and you're going to make a choice. You're going to say, I'm deciding to write about a bad case of the polka dots, or a bad case of the hiccups, or a bad case of the coughs, or a bad case of the basketball dribbling, or a bad case of the backflips. And you're gonna write about something that you've maybe struggled with and you've maybe kept to yourself. And it can be real, it can be make believe, but it's a way to get some expression out there, have a little bit of fun, and remind ourselves that we do need to share with others when we're feeling frustrated. So I have A Bad Case of the Stripes by David Shannon. And you've seen the cover, I'm sure. I've always thought, wouldn't it be fun to dress up like that for Halloween? So I'm going to read the story and then I'll show the pictures to you. Camilla Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camilla was always worried about what other people thought of her. Today she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school and she couldn't decide what to wear. There were so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror. Then she screamed. So here's Camilla in her red dress. And it looks like she's got lots of clothes. Her mother ran into the room, and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens," she cried, "you're completely covered with stripes." This was certainly true. Camilla was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camilla's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camilla answered, "but just look at me." "You get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camilla was relieved. She didn't want to miss the first day of school, but she was afraid of what other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. So here's poor Camilla and her stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camilla. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughing, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" No, Camilla told him. I feel fine. Well then, Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me. And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camilla. They called her Camilla Crayon and Night of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. So here's a picture of Camilla and her class. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots!" Sure enough, Camilla turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard!" and a pattern of squares covered her skin. Soon, everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camilla was changing faster than you could change channels on a TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camilla home from school. She's just too much of a distraction, and I've been getting calls from the other parents. They're afraid those stripes may be contagious." Camilla was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now, nobody wanted to be in the same room with her. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," sighed Camilla. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at enough for one day. Well, yes, I see," Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mr. Cream phoned the next day. "I think I'd better bring in the specialist. We'll be right over." About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. "This is Dr. Grop, Dr. Sponge, Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young." Then the specialist went to work on Camilla. They squeezed and jabbed and tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. "Well, it's not the mumps," concluded Dr. Grop, "or the measles," said Dr. Sponge. "Definitely not chicken pox," put in Dr. Cricket. "Or sunburn," said Dr. Young. "Try these," said the specialist. They each handed her a bottle filled with different colored pills. "Take one of each before bed," said Dr. Grop. Then they filed out the front door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camilla took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she did feel different. But when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit right. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant multicolored pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called, but this time, instead of the specialists, he brought the experts. Dr. Gord and Mr. Mellon were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camilla was poked and prodded, looked at, and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers. Then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. "It might be a virus," he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy little virus balls appeared all over Camilla. "Or possibly some form of bacteria," said Mr. Mellon. "Out popped squiggly little bacteria tails." "Or it could be a fungus," added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camilla was covered with different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camilla, then at each other. "We need to go over these numbers again back at the lab," Dr. Gord explained. "We'll call you when we know something." but the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. By now, the TV news had found out about Camilla. Reporters from every channel were outside her house telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon, a huge crowd was camped out on the front lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, an old medicine man, a guru, and even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camilla's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots and berries and crystals and feathers and a long furry tail, but nothing worked. And here's poor Camilla. Every time somebody tried something new, she just kept changing. One day, a woman who called herself an environmental therapist claimed she could cure Camilla. Close your eyes, she said. Breathe deeply and become one with your room. I wish you hadn't said that, Camilla groaned. Slowly, she started to melt into the walls of her room. Her bed became her mouth. Her nose was a dresser, and 2 paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran from the house. What are we going to do? Cried Mrs. Cream. It just keeps getting worse and worse. She began to sob. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet little knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was just as plump and sweet as a strawberry. Excuse me, she said brightly, but I think I can help. She went into Camilla's room and looked around. My goodness, she said with a shake of her head, what we have here is a bad case of the stripes. One of the worst I've ever seen. She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. Here, she said, these might do the trick. Are those magic beans? Asked Mrs. Cream. Oh my, no, replied the kind old woman. There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I'll bet you'd like some, wouldn't you? She asked Camilla. Camilla wanted a big, heaping plateful of lima beans more than just about anything, but she was still afraid to admit it. Yuck, she said. No one likes lima beans, especially me. Oh dear, the old woman said sadly. I guess I was wrong about you. She put the beans back in her bag and started toward the door. Camilla watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she'd been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. Wait, she cried. The truth is, I really love lima beans. I thought so, the old woman said with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camilla's mouth. Said Camilla. Suddenly, the branches, feathers, and squiggly tails began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camilla, and everything was back to normal. I'm cured, she shouted. Yes, said the old woman. I knew the real you was in there somewhere. She patted Camilla on the head, then she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camilla wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care a bit. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of stripes again. So that's the end of the story. And for your writing this week, I thought it would be fun to do just a fun last writing for your last week of school. Um, think about something that you maybe are afraid of, but you don't really want to admit it, or maybe you don't care about admitting it. Um, and and do a writing. If you notice and follow with the book, the more and more Camilla hides her love for lima beans, the worse and worse her condition becomes. So she begins with the stripes, and then the stripes change colors, and then she grows things every time she gets more and more anxious and doesn't want to admit that she loves the lima beans. Um, so you could talk about something that you really, really love, but you don't want to admit to anybody. You could talk about something that you are very, very afraid of, but you don't want to admit to anybody. And just kind of have some fun with that. I wrote about being afraid of driving in the snow because I am terrified of driving in the snow. There were other things I thought about. I thought about writing about being afraid of roller coasters. I thought about writing about being afraid of thunderstorms because I really don't like thunderstorms. So there are some things out there that you might think, well, I never really wanted anybody to know that I was afraid to swim, but I can maybe admit that in my writing. Enjoy it, have some fun with it. My writing was very basic. I get polka dots on me. You could go much more in depth, like the book, like Camilla, and it could get worse and worse. My polka dots could have gotten one color and then many color, and then they could have become 3D polka dots, and then they could have made noises. I could have gotten as creative as that. So do what you can do as creative as you want, and I would love, love, love to read them, as I said before, or as I will say again. So enjoy this activity and enjoy your summer as well.